I'm happy to introduce Todd Baur. Todd is a founder. He's a human-computer interaction specialist, developer, kind of jack of all trades, Mr. Funny Sense of Humor that keeps us all afloat and sane here at Operation Code. He's going to be talking a bit about his own experience on development and programming. If any of you want to ask any questions, feel free to put it in the chat. We'll have some open time as he kind of goes through the workshop today. So if you don't understand something or if you want him to repeat something, feel free to put it in the chat. Todd, take it away.
All right. Yeah. So like she mentioned, I've been doing UX, UI stuff for most of my career. Kind of got into programming really early as a kid. I think the earliest program I can remember writing was in 1992 was the first one I wrote. And then quickly kind of picked up Perl, and I wrote a bulletin board system in Perl back then before AOL was a thing. And then AOL became a thing, and I was like, this is awesome. HTML is the best thing ever. And then I just kind of ran with it from there. Started a couple of companies, failed a bunch of companies. It's how it goes. Yeah, I currently work at a company called Cognac Government Services, and we do direct work with the government. Pretty great project I'm on right now, doing disease tracking for the USDA. So more like animal health security and that kind of stuff. So pretty cool. So welcome to How to Be a Programmer. So this is comes out of a discussion that I've had probably a couple times over life, but it's something I think like I wish more industries did. And, you know, we talk a lot about what you're supposed to code, and like it's really easy to go in Google and, you know, be like, yeah, the joke is like, you know, search Google, Control V, Control C, you know, then pull request closed, you're good. I think like that's sort of a disservice to folks that like really there is an art form to just being a programmer and understanding how to, like, what I hate this term, but like how to be a 10x programmer, right? And so what I hope you get out of this class is like some of these little workflow tips that I've learned along the way about like how to get faster at your job and how to make a good work environment and those types of things. So before I was a programmer, I sort of just thought about stuff, and I didn't really take logic for like an art form. I saw the sun outside a lot, and when someone asks for a raise, it sounds like they want more money, right? And that's probably not what we want. Last thing is asking what time something was done is perfectly okay. You can ask multiple times. It seems totally reasonable. But then you become a programmer. Yeah, so using the internet is really quite useful and loads off the stress ball. So it's saying like, you know, every time you use the internet, it's just sort of like you don't really care about how it works. You just know it works, right? And it's nice and relaxing. But then you become this programmer, and everything you look in the world, you break it all down, and it's foo and bar, and you worry about these systems. And after several months of doing this, you kind of surface from your office and you realize, oh, there is a planet floating around in space, and there's a star out there. Someone asks for a raise, you totally start talking about big O notation. You know what that means. And you try not to use the internet because you find out that most of the time loading the internet is a slow and painful endeavor because you're running so much code and debugging tools that your own machine is the problem to getting on there. So, all right, a problem for every solution. So when you start out as a programmer, everyone starts talking to you about all their problems, and you start going, you look and you're like, okay, I gotta solve these problems. But then you get shown all of these things about like how to solve them. It's really not important that you do that, right? Like that definitely is a workflow that a lot of folks fall into, that trap, but it's not really what we're doing. What we're really trying to do is avoid those problems and really go through a process that helps you distill down and break apart problems into pieces that are meaningful chunks that you can then ship in code, right? most importantly, to think about everything you do, it has to equal out, right? Like when you're writing code, code is essentially just math, right? You're writing this, you're using a language. That language allows you to express word problems. Those word problems can be run, and those things that run it can be tests. And the ideal that tests and your code together should always equal out to 0, right? You should always have passing tests and tests that test your failings and your successes, and all that goes as one product, right? So first thing I can tell you is never go into solving a problem writing code first, right? You always want to just pause and think about it. And the second thing is never repeat yourself. And you hear this a lot. Repeat yourself often, right? So what are we saying? Don't repeat yourself often. We're talking about when you're writing code, like you want reusability, but reusability also comes at a cost. And so you end up trading time and getting reusability perfected over just copying code from somewhere else and shipping that because I can just duplicate this code and it works. And then the last thing, the most important thing, when everything else has failed, when you've gone through all the design process, you figure it all out, and you figure out a clever way to avoid writing code, and that doesn't work, go and write some code. And barring that, remember, it's always okay to say, I don't know, right? This is one of the important things about being a programmer. You say this a lot more than you realize. And there's this, there's sort of this like imposter syndrome that always hangs over us, that we're supposed to know the answers to these problems. Like, like how come we don't know the entire array class in TypeScript? Like we should just know all those methods. And it's hardly the case, right?
Can I ask you something about that?
Yeah.
If you're a newbie and this is your first job in the dev field,
Mm-hmm.
I've noticed that newbies might feel like they don't want to admit that they don't know because they feel like it might be discrediting to their reputation at work. How would you handle that?
You don't have a reputation at work. What I've learned over time is that the things that we worry about, our reputation and all those things, most people are already worrying about their own reputations. There's, so try not to judge yourself so much. Just enjoy the journey. Don't worry about like where you land on, like, am I a beginner or an intermediate or an expert, right? Like, you know where you are when you look at problems and you can decide, right? But every problem you get is a different evaluation of where you are in your journey, right? And so don't worry about the judgment. Don't worry about the imposter syndrome. Just do the work. And if you don't know the answer, then raise your hand. Like one of the things I've learned about this job is it can be very social and engaging if you allow it to be, right? Like there's tons of people out there who are just solving problems on the internet for free, right? They just give away their code for free. And most people would go, that's crazy, right? You could totally make money doing all that stuff, but it's really not what it's about. It's like, hey, I have this problem. I found this solution. I hope I can share this with somebody else. And then we don't have to repeat ourselves.
So there's a question in the chat from DN, and they're asking how fast does a developer get fired on average, or if they worry about the turnover rate?
This is the thing about, if you're worried about getting fired, then like maybe use that like motivation and change that energy, right? Like, because what I also learned is that the more I worried about getting fired, the more likely I was to get fired, right? And so just like find, like, this is a tough thing, right? Because on the other hand, you end up on these teams where it's sort of like I've been on teams where they're just like browbeating you down. They're just like, where's the feature? Where's the feature? And you're just like, oh my God, like I just fire me, it would be easier. And then there's other times you're like, man, I'm doing a really good job here, but just, I feel like the junior developer is actually like senior to me, right? It depends on the environment. Like what oftentimes is the case in those situations is like it has really nothing to do with your skill or capability. It's just a toxic culture. And you know, you can decide that for yourself in your career if that is okay to like help your teammates like rise up out of that toxicity, right? Because you don't want to be in that situation where you feel like, oh, if I don't do this because I'm an average programmer, I'm going to get fired, right? That's not a supportive group, right? Like a team of developers should all lift each other up together, right? Like we all are battling with these complex issues. We should all be accepting of, we should all be accepting of each other's pitfalls and strengths, and we can all, the more we're vulnerable to that, the better the team will be, because like I know that someone on my team is stronger with whatever feature versus like I know I'm really good at like collections or whatever. Does that answer? That's a good question. Cool. Let's talk about the work environment itself, right? So first thing is that your brain uses oxygen. Maybe get something to help your office have a lot of it, because it does actually help you with your thinking. You can buy these little portable devices that will help clean up your room, the air in your room. It really does actually make a difference. And it sounds wild, but an air purifier makes a big difference. Also, like a lot, I think nowadays this is probably a lot more common where you're seeing folks have a desktop system and then they're working from home a lot. So make sure you have a laptop or something, a tablet that you could then use for like remote desktop or whatever. But definitely like get outside. We go work somewhere else if you can. It really does make a good idea to like just get the fresh air, get the sun on your eyes, right? Because we can stay in these rooms for 11 hours a day sometimes and not even realize it. Choose a chair with proper ergonomics. This is like so important, especially for your back pain and stuff. Make sure you pick a chair that sits you up proper, has good ergonomic support for the small back. You can put your shoulders back and arms out if you have to, but not feel like you're having to crunch your shoulders forward, right? You want to keep your posture straight and solid. So, because over time, the longer you do this, the more you find yourself slouching, and it's no good. It creates headaches, and you actually cloud your thoughts and do that. So it's a good example of, you see this skeleton here. He's sitting up too far from the back of the chair. He's hunched over. He's too close to the monitor, right? You want to try to keep your eyes and the top of the monitor almost level with each other. It's the easiest way to think about it. Have you heard of the term sun gods before? This is the hieroglyphic I found on the internet of the first sun god exercises. So the way this works is you put your arms out like this, you put them forward, you just stretch, then you go down, you come back up, and then put your arms down. You're like, a good 5-minute break. And then you realize what the bug was in your code. It was your test the whole time.
We've got a couple questions. Do you want me to jump
please.
in? Or okay.
Yeah, like I said, this is supposed to be conversational, so feel free to just jump in.
So Sharon was sharing that she comes from a creative background. Collaboration was really key. It blows me away that people are just unwilling to help each other. That's for sure. Kev asked, can we be expecting post-COVID employers to offer workplaces similar to Google with free food, coffee, games, nap room, etc.? Tech employers, he needs.
You got to decide if that's the workplace that you want to work at, right? Like, there's no doubt Google is doing that because they're expecting your 20 to 35-year-old, like, single tech worker to hang out there 12 to 15 hours a day. Like, why wouldn't you? Get free food, right? You got all this nice nap room. Like, why go home? Especially in the Bay Area where you may have an hour and a half commute. So that's where a lot of that kind of comes from, I think. When I was younger, I really looked for a lot of that stuff because I was like, wow, what a great benefit to have all these stuff. But then I sort of realized that it's a trap. And I would really prefer companies to not spend their money there, even though it's a nice benefit, and instead give me better things like, you know, a lower premium on my insurance, or a better 401k, or, you know, other benefits like that, like maybe free eye exams. Like that's the stuff that is really going to make an impact on your life from your employer. If they want to pop for a lunch, like guess what? Like most businesses, they have an Amex. They can plunk it down anytime they want to. Like why make it a, you know, an expectation of the employer that you have a daily gift? You know, that's my view on it. I know maybe somebody else has a different view on those things, but I think it's an issue. It's a hot issue in the industry right now.
I'll also jump in that if you work for an employer that offers unlimited PTO, that is usually a sign culturally that they don't want you to take PTO. It sounds like the opposite, but every single person that I've known, including myself, that have worked for companies that say, oh yeah, we have unlimited vacation. Sounds really great on paper, but when you actually try to take vacation, the culture is that they will shame you into taking a day off, or if you get sick.
Yeah. Yeah, there's sort of like, oh, okay, well, you know, you said it's unlimited. I've taken 2 months this year and now it's a problem, you know?
Here's another question from Jeff Lee. When searching for that first developer position, how does one judge their team to discern how supportive they will be?
Just ask. Like people, I think will tell you, especially if you're interviewing with a technical lead on the project, you know, like you can kind of feel it out. I think I've worked for companies where I hated the company, but I love the people I was working with. And I think that's a perspective you probably want to keep in mind when you go through this, is that like, you know, frankly, like I have been doing this a long time, that like I have a very solid network of friends that like have kept me in work for most of my career. And so, you know, hold on to that. That's an important thing, you know, like those friendships, those connections are the things you need to foster. The companies will come and go.
There's another comment. Urias Millet says, my imposter syndrome went away once I saw the dev team wanted me to succeed.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
And that might be, you know, there, I think I've talked about flipping the script when you're interviewing. When you're being interviewed, it's important that you interview the company too. So something
Right.
that you can test the hiring managers on. If you have a junior developer or somebody that's stuck on code, and this can happen to even senior developers and engineers. If somebody's stuck on a piece of code or stuck on a project, what is your response to that person? And based on what they tell you, that can kind of help you gauge whether it's going to be a healthy environment where they encourage people to ask questions and encourage the team to work together, or if they just go, well, you're just going to have to figure it out on your own without any help, you know. And I've seen folks accept internships where it really wasn't a solid internship. They didn't learn, they didn't get the mentorship, they didn't have the opportunity for feedback. And they felt like they were just an island working on your own. That's really not fun, especially when you're trying to grow.
Even when you're not trying to grow, really. I
Yeah.
mean, you know, I frequently, we can talk about this in a few slides, but we can talk a little bit about the way I've organized our team and how it's made a difference. But yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, regardless of how you organize your team, the core thing is the support, you know, that like when you do find yourself between a rock and a hard place, you can just admit that and someone will be happy to help you, you know. I mean, think about it, like just human nature in general, right? Like if you know, unless you were raised in like a traumatic household and, you know, or suffered some trauma in your life, like we're generally inclined to just help people. And, you know, and I think like one of the things that is like why it's called imposter syndrome is sort of that, you know, this idea that like I'm not going to get help even if I tried, right? And that's really not the case at all if you're on the right team. All right, let's get back on track though here. So let's talk about keyboards real fast. So one of the things to just make your workflow better on the keyboard is just consider like your text editor and how it works also. A lot of folks who use like V, for example, Vim text editor, Vim has these modes, and it's really, a lot of text editors have this sort of love affair with the escape key, right? And so one of the things I do almost every time I get on a computer within the first like hour is remap the tab key to escape and escape to tab, because I rarely hit tab, but I hit escape all the time. And rather than lift my hand up all the time to go hit escape, I just want tab right there. Now I always have my finger ready to go. Second thing is, and most important, is that like once you pick an editor, kind of stick with it. That way you can kind of memorize those keyboard shortcuts, especially things like, join lines, or like being able to select multiple lines in your document at once. So you can, if you have to do like, write the same code in like 8 different places, you can set that up. And every editor is slightly different, so I'm not going to dive into the technical parts of that, but you get the idea. Increase the key repeat rate. So this is really important too, and this is like drives me crazy all the time when I get on junior devs machines. They're like moving the cursor, and it's like, and I'm like, change your settings, like get that thing going faster. It's super easy to do. Here's the steps for it if you want to just do it right now while we're on the call. Always have pen and paper nearby. If you notice behind me, I have a whiteboard. This is actually what you need to get promoted to senior developer. If you don't have one of these, then like you might as well forget that promotion. You're back to thinking a raise is something that you won't get. All right, treat your environment like it's going to be gone in any minute, because that time is always right now, right? It's usually on a Friday when your boss wants to deploy everything, and you don't want that situation. So what you can ensure is that like your computer is going to die on you. What you need to be able to do is react to that in a way that gets you back up and running quickly. So figure out like where you can store your stuff securely, right? GitHub has private repos now, so you could put stuff there and encrypt it. You can, both with JetBrains development environment and with VS Code, there's tips and tools where you can synchronize your settings across computers. And that's really important, because you can't think about it like, well, I only have one computer, why would I synchronize? And the answer is because that computer is going to die. And when you get your new one, you could just synchronize your settings back down. You don't have to reconfigure everything. Last important thing is this tool. I love this tool, OhmyZSH. And I'll probably spend a little bit of time just talking about some of the customizations that I include with OhmyZSH. So first thing I would recommend you do if you're going to go try this out, install OhmyZSH. And what it does is it'll create, this is for Mac and Linux folks. If you're on Windows, then I'm terribly sorry, but get a better OS. If you're on a real operating system though, then you can clone this down, put it in, it creates a folder in your home directory called OhmyZSH, and just add a Git remote to your personal account and make sure it's a private repository and push it up there. And from that point on, you'll have everything that you need to do to configure your shell in that folder. And then next time your machine dies, you can just clone it back down and you don't have to worry about reconfiguring your shell. One of the things I do in ZSH is I create a custom folder, and then I put a bunch of shell scripts inside there. And so things like one of my favorite tools, and I'm gonna say a bad word, so if you're not military or you've never heard this word before, you can plug your ears. But one of my favorite tools is called the fuck, and you can go get it from Google. It's awesome. If you make a mistake with your commands, you don't have to worry about it. You just type fuck and it fixes it. Great. So I'm like, great, I can type fuck now and it fixes all my problems, right? Well, guess what? I'm fucking tired of typing fuck. So I aliased it to F. And now I just type F and it fixes all my problems. You find yourself in a shell, generally typing the same commands over and over again. Stop. Don't do it. Don't repeat yourself, right? Take that command, make an alias, put it in your custom folder, and check it into your private repo. And then you never have to worry about it again. Last little tip I had on here, my little friend DuckDuckGo. If you use Google all the time for your primary search, Google eventually puts you at a disadvantage because they have this thing called a personalization engine where they're trying to give you relevant search results based on the things you've been putting in Google for your whole life. But that's actually a disservice to you, the programmer, because that means that when somebody else on your team does a Google search, they can a set of results, which also means that the answer you didn't get. Why do that? Just use a privacy-based browser. There's any other browsers or any other search engines besides Google for primary searches, and then you can validate those links with Google after. Someone told me this a long time ago as they were walking me out of the door. Your job is automation, automate your job, right? Like if you want to be a master at programming, you think about automation a lot and you think about how you can make your work environment and the things you do every day automated, right? You have a tool on your Mac called Automator, for example, right? You can write little scripts. So like if you find yourself like filling out the same forms every day, stop typing. Like just go use Automator and have it fill out the forms for you. You can also download Selenium Recorder as a plugin for most browsers. You can use Selenium to record what you do in the browser and then replay that later. Never tell your boss that you automated a job. And this is why. If you tell him that, just show him this XK CD. Because this goes back to my first slide, right? The last thing you want to do is write code. If you have exhausted all other reasoning and your end result is to write code, then, okay, we'll have to accept that, right? But otherwise, if you can avoid it, you should try to avoid writing code. There's probably a solution that already exists out there you could probably glue together and it would be just as equal to rolling your own.
There's a question from Kev that asks, should we let our boss know that we automate our job? Or I guess maybe it means.
No, see, this is, the business will never value your optimizations. They don't even want to hear about it. Don't even tell them about it. You say the word refactor. Refactor means losing money to anybody that's not a programmer. Because that means that you're going to do work and they're going to get the same thing that they have right now. And to us, we're like, well, yeah, that's good. And to everyone else, they're like, no, that sounds dumb. Why would you do that? Right. And the answer is like kind of more intellectual than business value, right? Like you have to really justify like huge refactors. But most of the time going into that fight, you're coming out bruised and bloody because the business people will just tear you apart with like how much it's going to cost to do that thing. All right, so we got two strategies. Dry, which stands for don't repeat yourself. And what that means in detail is favor your abstractions in your code and reusing those abstractions as much as possible. This also means that you have to really kind of plan out what your data shapes are going to be and how you could reuse those, right? One of the things that this lends itself to is that it makes it really fun eventually to like write code in your app and grep it and experiment. But it does not produce fast apps and it does not produce cheap apps. So the alternative to dry is called wet, which means write everything twice. And it's the opposite, right? you, instead of writing a bunch of abstractions and then reusing them, you just copy and paste everything over again. And you maybe change the names and some variables or whatever, but largely it's the same code, right? Problem with that is that it adds tech debt when refactors come, because now instead of one method that did all the things for you, you have 4 of them. You have to decide, how am I going to make 4 methods do one thing, right? And get back to dry. So it's fast, produces fast applications. It's not very good, and it's pretty cheap though. So somewhere you have to balance both. And this is where the art form of programming comes in, right? Sometimes you can do abstractions and you can say, yeah, we got to win. Sometimes you're like, you know what? It's Friday and I'm just going to put another if statement in and ship that. That's how it goes. Most importantly, though, whichever way you go, you got to understand how and when to document your code and what that means. So documenting code is not just a matter of, building some documentation website necessarily. It's also like doing things like making sure whatever ticketing system you use is also up to date. Like you want to be able to point to code in that system. So when people who are technical want to know why you did something, you can point to the discussion that's going on that isn't technical. And so people can start there, right? Also, though, when you do want to document your code in the product itself, then you should automate that. And there's tons of tools out there to do this. Most of them are, language specific. So me these days doing a lot of like TypeScript, JavaScript stuff. We use TSDoc or JSDoc, which is what it's based on. And essentially you're just writing comments in your code, and then you use this tool that can go through all your code, find all those magic comments and stuff, and then build you a website where you can read all that and see the examples. And super cool. Go check it out if you haven't done any style like that. But good place to look at like examples for that would be like any kind of like library that's out there, right? If you've got any kind of website, component website, for example, right? Like you can go look inside their code and you'll see these magic comments in there that build that whole website for you. Bootstraps is actually really good. A couple of books to throw out here. I think these are the 4 books that are like on the top of my list as soon as somebody says like, I want to just be a better programmer. Like I kind of understand how to code, but I don't really understand programming itself, right? So if you have these books already in your library, good job. But if not, go grab them. Also, I run a list of good reads for programmers. I'll throw that out on Operation Code Slack channel too for us. Let's talk about prototyping real quick. So as I said, starting this off, one of the things that you want to try to do first before you do any kind of programming is to just prototype out your thoughts, right? And so what tools would you pick for that, right? You could do it. Prototyping doesn't have to be this full high fidelity mock-up necessarily, right? Prototyping could just be as simple as like, I need to do a workflow. I need to understand how, when this data comes in, it needs to go through all these systems and come out looking like this, right? Like you can do these things, and the most important outcome of that is that you can engage your customers in a way that doesn't sound like a bunch of like gobbledygook, right? Because they don't know. But most people, I find, can look at a flowchart and go, yeah, that's what I want, right? So this is just a couple tools to pick to achieve that. XD, pretty good for doing more of the later work, I think, in the UI design side of it. Like when you actually want to build, like if you just have a really difficult client who's like super demanding and needs a functional, quote unquote functional app, XD is a good tool for being able to build these sort of clickable prototypes that run right on their phone without, all the back end and doing the actual coding part, right? So check that out. There's a couple of cheap ones that I recommended on here too. I haven't personally used these, but they were recommended to me by folks I was interviewing and getting ready for this class. My favorite one is Envision because just the enterprise integration they have is just phenomenal. I've just had a long relationship with a lot of the folks over there. So give that a try. Figma and Miro, though, I use pretty regularly these days. At my current job, we use Figma a lot for doing the things that we normally do in XD, like doing wireframes and stuff like that. But it's also nice because Figma can just be a brainstorming tool as well, right? Same with Miro. Both of those tools are really awesome because they enable multiple editors at the same time. So a lot of times on our teams, we'll open up a Miro and 4 or 5 of us will be drawing boxes and moving things around, trying to go through like some piece of, feature that we're trying to flesh out and break down into smaller bits. Any questions on this?
The only caveat I would add is that Sketch is only available for Macs. So Windows users, it's not available.
Right, and the other ones are available on other platforms. Okay, so just some more strategies. This is sort of the overall workflow that I always go through when I'm doing prototyping stuff. First thing is just like figure out what you're trying to do. What's a must-have versus a nice-to-have versus a should-have. Some of the graphics at your disposal. You can do mind mapping. You can do user journey maps. You can do storyboards. You can largely, though, the goal is to get to where you can get the vision out of your customer and onto something everyone can see, right? Because I've definitely met a lot of founders who have great lofty visions, but they're terrible at putting them on paper, right? And so if you can help them through that process, then you'll have an excellent life in design. Yes, Jeffrey. Any questions on prototyping strategies? Anybody have any other strategies they like? Okay, keep going. Go ahead.
Oh no, I was just going to add affinity diagramming because I do a lot of UX research prior to the mock-up stage.
How do you describe affinity diagramming?
So when I do a user assessment interview, I'll literally type up or I'll record if they're talking really fast or there's multiple people in the interview. And then I upload it to otter.ai to transcribe it because I don't want to assume that I've gotten everything. I may have missed a couple things. And what's really cool about transcribing it, also because I have a TBI, so I know how to use certain adaptive tools to help me. When you upload it to a transcription service, you visually see the words, and sometimes it'll pick out fragments of sentences or patterns of repetitive thoughts that the user has addressed, like if they have pain points or workflow issues. That, if they're talking to me about a potential app I'm creating, like what are the functionalities that they want, I might note that in the interview, they mentioned 5 different times in 5 different ways, the same issue. And that'll kind of pop up in the transcription. And then what I'll do is I'll actually put it in the sticky note and create an affinity diagram in Miro. And you can start grouping the users together that all said the same thing, right? So when you go back to the client or the stakeholder, you can use that as a justification for services. So sometimes stakeholders are limited by budget, or they think, they know what everybody should want, but they're also not taking into consideration the multiple users and how it affects them. So that's part of that documentation process too.
Yeah, that is frequently the PO's downfall, is that they can quickly design for themselves and not for other folks.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So, good call. Overall, I just have 3 simple rules. Just remember, ego is the thief of happiness. Like, try not to have an ego at work. I have this persona I have ran into in my career. I like to call him Rick. And Rick is the guy who is terrible at delegating, does a lot of the core work on the product, never lets anybody else touch it. And whenever there's a problem, somebody needs Rick to fix it. The problem with Rick on the team is that, Rick is like having a computer that's just going to crash at any given time, right? And so I've been on teams where it's like, you're like, Rick's our guy. Like we can't get rid of Rick. And I'm like, look, if you fire Rick, I hate to say it, but like the rest of the team, I think is going to do better because they'll all have the opportunities that Rick, denies the team for growth, right? Like one of the things about growth is trusting folks to be burdened with the problem and having them come back successful. If you don't allow that, then what are you doing? Last thing, do one thing at a time. I can't tell you how important this is as programmers. Like you constantly, it seems like you can feel like, I got this guy who's asking me for help and I got my PMs wanting to know like, where's this feature at? And I'm working on it today and I'm just getting pulled all over the place. It's easy to fall into the trap of being distracted and not like being as productive as you should. So as best you can, try to shut all that stuff down. Just do one thing at a time. If you have to like, especially with like help, right? It's hard because you don't necessarily want to tell people like, I don't want to help you, but you also don't, it's sort of like reciprocal, right? Like you want the help too when you need it, right? So if you are in the middle of something, like don't stop until you have that finished and then go and do the next thing. And those last two things, reset expectations and document consensus. I can't tell you how important these two things are. Is like you will go through development. Your designer will have expectations of like what things are supposed to be. Your PO's expectations are even further from that, right? And so as a developer, you're sort of the first person to really like be on the front lines in the trenches of like the actual problem. And so you have to constantly go back and say like, hey, I know you thought about this, this drop down doing whatever, but like that doesn't work on Android for these reasons, right? And then the designer's all like, oh crap, I gotta go, talk to the PO, blah, blah, blah. So just make sure that you're constantly communicating, and then, whatever answers you get back, make sure you document those in your ticket system or whatever, process your company has. Just follow it to the letter, because eventually someone's going to come back and say, well, that's not what I said. And then you'll be able to go, well, actually you did, because I documented it. And that was what we agreed to do. So do you want to change that now or what? And the most important thing about that is to not make it about the person or what the person did or what didn't do. Make it about the work. Always make it about the work. I don't want to read this off, but I think Don Norman makes a very good point about feedback and discoverability. I think this is like this loop that you always try to create and to be, an effective programmer, is that you want to be able to experiment and go into a code base and change it without the whole house falling over. At the same time, you want to be able to do that and put it out in front of people and see if they like it, right? So if you're coming into a code base that seems restrictive in doing all that stuff, maybe the test quality isn't as high as you'd like. Maybe there's no documentation on how like components are used or things like that. That's a golden opportunity for a junior developer, I think. Like if you are comfortable writing tests and you come on a team that doesn't have tests, and you want to enable this feedback really quickly, offer to write tests, because it's a good way to onboard. You get to go in and monkey with the code that no one's really been monkeying with, and get to ask the questions that get the test coverage up, and everyone benefits. All right, so a couple of the like roles that you may run into later in life in your career. Maybe you want to be a solutions architect or a dev manager. At eBay, we had this role called individual contributor, and that's basically like you're a manager without any reports. So you kind of get to get assigned to a project and just kind of listen in and make, the contributions the team may not necessarily like have a grasp on that you can, understand better than they. Or maybe you want to go even higher and just do like senior vice president somewhere, right? But the thing about all those roles is they're all really the same thing. And when it comes down to the work itself, right? What you're really trying to do is look at what problems are coming in. You're looking for existing solutions to those problems and then socializing those with the team and saying like, this is the way, right? This is like the vision for the product. This is how we, this is how we write our code. Like this is the format we use. All that stuff is all, handled by those folks. But the most important thing I think is like to get to this point, you have to be able to, convince people of the things you think are the right solution to the problems they're presenting you with, right? If you have a bit of a struggle with like communicating to leaders that aren't technical and stuff, then it's going to be really tough to get into these roles. Lean teams is about logistics. So if you have a boss who's constantly talking about their strategy and stuff, I would just run, because strategy don't mean a thing really. Strategy is just, it's not real, Strategy is like theory, but logistics is about like how does the code get from A to B, right? If you have a boss who sees a problem, sees a debate like, oh, I think we should use 4 spaces, and someone's like, no, let's use tabs, right? Don't even have the argument. Just put it in your code. Like you'll have some linter that you're using that can take those rules and just make it about code. And that way your devs on your team, when they have these debates, they can point to the code and say, hey, the linter is doing this and I don't like it. What should we do? And then the pull request can be made, and like you're not really having a political debate about tabs and spaces anymore. You're having a code debate about it.
So Todd, how often do you see code style guides being followed or used or in existence?
100% of the time. Mm-hmm.
And what would you do in a work situation if you go in and there isn't a code style guide? Like, let's say you inherit code you have to work on and every single file has different formats.
I kind of view it as like a 30-minute problem, really, if you're on a new team. Like, first thing I would do is just go around and ask, be like, hey, like, there's no code style, like, there's no linting tool or anything like this. Do we want one? Like, first find out why. Maybe the boss just has like some weird thing about it. Maybe it was causing some bugs when they were trying to go to production. Who knows why? But find that out first. Like, always ask questions. Like, no one's going to get fired over asking questions, right? And the second thing is like, if they go, well, I don't know, we just never did it, and then go implement one. Like I was saying, don't complain, create. Right. So if you see that you can solve this and make it about code and not about the politics of why they don't have it, then you'll do really well. Yeah. Mostly the dev manager's job is to go to meetings and listen to business requirements and then convince the business owners that they don't need those business rules. That there's always a simpler path, right? And the reason the dev manager always relies on their UX person or whatever to do that is because they need that person in the meeting to go, yeah, check boxes, because you could just tap them. You don't need a drop down and a select menu and all these other things, right? Like that stuff's really important. And it's good to have team members around who you can bounce this stuff off of and say like, hey, I noticed when I use this form, it takes me 5 taps to do something. Can we just use check boxes? And then, you're not complaining, you're creating. Yeah, that's the next slide, folks. Thanks for coming. You have any more questions, comments?
Well, I know somebody's got a really difficult question. How many of you currently work in the industry? You can do a little emoji if you want.
Yeah.
Thumbs up. Okay, so for the newbies, what are the biggest fears about working in the industry, or what are your biggest challenges that you've seen so far? Kev said he finished vet tech, can't get any job leads at the moment.
I can talk about that a little bit. Well, I guess I see this a lot on, I guess I got two things about that. So this is just sort of general, it's not pointing in particular. I guess in the year, I guess it's been a year now. Wow. That I've been messing with Operation Code here. I tend to see a lot of resumes that come in and they're trying to get a tech job, and then they'll put, like 15 jobs in their resume that have nothing to do with technical stuff at all, right? And like, it's a tough thing when you're switching roles from, sales to tech, right? Like, if you're not going into tech sales, it's hard to like tell your story to someone who's going, but what about data structures? And you're like, well, kind of new here, right? So how do you tell that story, right? What I think I tend to want to look for in people when I'm reading those stories is like, what impact did you make, right? Like, you can say that you worked at a place, that's cool, but like, how did you make an impact there, right? Like, I would rather hire somebody who I know is going to execute and like be awesome at their job than to hire a Rick who knows everything about programming and is going to, just deny everybody else on my team the opportunity to get help, right? Like, we want to foster leaders, right? You want to foster people who are going to, I've been watching a lot of Raya the Dragon lately, feel like the Kumandra, the, the oneness that a team needs, right? So.
Got another good question. Mike Ragone says, how does the industry view disabled veterans? I just found out I have a permanent damage to both retinas and worry it might not be well received.
I honestly don't know that that's a problem. I mean, I really don't. Like, I think that's a strength in a lot of ways. Like, if you have a talent a lot of people don't have, and that's, most of us folks, use computers, and we tend to overlook like those challenges, right? And having someone on a team who has those challenges is really important to building a good product.
I would say, just from myself being a disabled veteran and having a TBI and having some limitations, education is really key. I think if you just go ahead and tell HR, or you tell your hiring manager or your team without taking the time to educate them, they might have an emotional reaction. Whereas if you say, hey, I have this issue and I'd like to use this adaptive or assistive mechanism or this software to help me do my work, and you can explain to them why, it definitely helps educate the need for diverse people on staff, and it breaks down that kind of barrier for people being afraid to hire disabled veterans, to be honest.
Yeah, I mean, we have disabled vets on our team, and like, no one ever really talks about it, to be quite honest, other than like when we need to just kind of support each other as friends. But other than that, it's not really a thing. I wouldn't, I think you're right. Like, if you need an assistive device, then like you should have it.
Mm-hmm. Sharon has a question. I was thinking about doing a boot camp. What is your best advice for after boot camp?
I am probably the worst person to ask about boot camps. I'm actually super fascinated by it because, like, I said starting out, I started this stuff when I was a kid, and like, to get answers to my questions, I didn't have a Google. I had to go to the computer club and all this stuff. And so I don't, my version of boot camp is like the Marines. Like, I went to Marine boot camp, and so people say they went to coding boot camp. I'm like, wow, you guys are hard. So I'm really fascinated by it. I don't know what the boot camp experience is like. To be honest, I think it sounds super intense though. Like, I think I don't know. I'm just like really fascinated by it because like I came out, like I was probably doing this stuff like 10 years before someone actually gave me the title programmer. I had been doing help desk and sysadmin work and just anything I could. You just like let somebody give me a crack at it. And then when finally somebody did, they're like, "Oh, you're pretty good at this." I'm like, "I've been doing it my whole life. I just needed the job." So, in that regard, I could look at that and say like that was a hard road for me because, I did do it before Google basically existed.
Yeah, Sharon, you can ask your questions on the Slack platform. We have a coding schools channel where there's a lot of different coding schools there, and the people who have gone through multiple different boot camps and can kind of give you their experience. Kev mentioned certs exam is also a challenge due to cost and retake limitations.
I do know as a veteran, you can use your GI Bill for some of this stuff too. And there's also the supplemental program, and my brain's just not saying the words right now.
Vet Tech?
Is it that, or?
If you're a military spouse, because I know we have military spouses among us, you can use Military OneSource. They do pay for certifications. You might want to look it up if you don't have your spouse's GI Bill.
Yeah, vocational tech, right? Is that what you're talking about?
Yeah,
right. Yeah.
There's Vet Tech and there's Voc Rehab, I believe.
Voc Rehab is what I'm thinking of. Yeah.
Urias is saying, is it bad practice to view a solution as minimum viable product when implementing code?
If you write one line in code, that's an MVP. Right? And MVP is just layering more and more stuff on top of that. The thing about MVPs is if you can get an MVP done on a napkin, you should do that. Because I'll tell you right now, I had a startup. We spent $15 million building a product only to take the product to market and have all of our customers tell us they had 6 of these. They didn't want another one. So had we gone to them prior on a napkin or a PowerPoint and said, check it out, they would have told us that sooner than we had gone to building the product, right? So you got to decide, like, if you're at the MVP stage, like, are you really at the MVP stage? Do you know your customer well enough to build an MVP? Like, do they have enough input into your MVP that you understand what you're doing? Ask those things. And then the last thing is how do I get away with not writing code to build an MVP and figure that out? Because by nature of it being called an MVP, it also means like, I'm probably going to throw this away.
Okay, let me see. Kev says, how far can the project one did in coding bootcamp really take a candidate today? Can you go directly into a senior developer role, skipping over a junior level?
No, because like I'm saying in the slides, like your senior developer role, like having the experience is, candidly important because you have to be at the point where in your career where you understand how to get out of these problems, right? And like also help your, I hate saying junior developer, but help them avoid those problems, right? And I say this to my team all the time, is that like, when someone, makes a mistake in code, like we fix the code, it's no big deal. But if the senior developer, the tech lead makes a mistake, everyone feels it. And so you gotta ask yourself too, like, are you ready for that emotional burden that, you have to sort all that out when you do make mistakes, right? Just think about it, like just enjoy the journey, like don't put a lot of effort into the titles and stuff, because I've been on 3-man teams where I was the CTO, and I've been on 3-man teams where I was just full stack developer. So,
I feel like this is a common question for people that are coming out of a military background, because when you're in the military rank, you're judged by rank a lot, right? You're judged by whether you're enlisted, whether you're an officer, what branch are you in, how long have you been in, how many deployment stripes do you have? You get judged a lot just by the symbols on your uniform. And when you get out, you kind of expect the civilian workforce to be like that. And I look at it like, it doesn't matter what your title is, it's about you and your journey with yourself. Because whether you are ready for a role with more seniority, whether you're a junior just tackling your first tech job, you're always going to have lots to learn, and you're always going to be responsible to other people and also to yourself. So it's more about enjoying the journey of where you are. And when you're ready to kind of level up and get to that next level, it's not just about enjoying the perks of having a senior title or getting like a pay raise. It's also higher responsibility, managing people, being in charge of making sure all their code is reviewed and that it works.
Most importantly, owning it when it doesn't work. Yeah, that's, I think, even more of a challenge. Like, everyone wants happy path, but rarely do we get happy path. And so, like I'm saying, is that like the senior role is really about managing that and keeping that noise away from the rest of your team, because that's just stressful and they don't need to hear it, right? Just keep it out of there so that that team can do good, and then you can deal with the politics and still like take on some of the more like tougher challenges that your team may not be able to do on their own. You sort of like, like they say 10x developer at that level for a reason, and I really don't like all these terms either, because how do you measure what 10x really is? But like, it's because like that person, when they do code, like the contributions are meaningful and large, or they solve like big problems, they enable the team, right? The team most of the time ends up doing is like delivering the features, making sure the sprints are moving forward, all that stuff. And then the senior role is making sure that you're creating that environment where they can be successful. And that means like making sure that they have an infrastructure that supports the application, making sure the resources that they need are coming together, the meetings are lining up, the business requirements make sense.
Okay, last couple questions because I know we're over time. What are some of the issues you have seen with junior developers? There is often the conundrum of jobs needing experience, but as a junior developer, that is the hurdle. What are some issues you have run into with junior developers in interviewing that would help reassure somebody looking to venture out and hire a junior developer?
When you go interview, make sure you like your senior developers. Make sure that they seem like folks who are going to be patient and caring and take the time to be patient and caring with you. And if you feel like you don't have that vibe, then it's probably a toxic work environment you really want to avoid. And it's not a bust on the company really, because a lot of times companies are just in that growth path where they need senior folks to come in and build the walls and stuff, and then pad them, and then let the junior developers and folks come in and play. And that's just where they are sometimes.
Jason says, do you have any recommendations for finding entry-level or junior level roles? I've been learning Ruby on Rails. Finding junior opportunities are few and far in between.
Yeah, I think the Ruby community is particularly challenging for junior developers right now. Mostly for two reasons. Is that one, I think a lot of folks are more focused these days on like picking up TypeScript and stuff. And so what I see a lot of times for Ruby jobs in particular is that they want a senior person, because you're either coming into a situation where they have a production system that's out of date and they've had difficulty upgrading it, or they just had difficulty with it because they've just not had a very great senior team managing the program. But most importantly, like, don't give up on Ruby, just get better at it. And then if you're really kick ass at it, it's pretty easy to get, a small shop where you have some seniority over stuff. So just focus on learning RSpec and be really good at writing tests for Ruby on Rails projects.
Last question of the night. Can you talk about portfolio reviews before you get interviewed for a position?
Yeah, this is the thing that I think is like critical to interviewee, the person going to the interview, because having a portfolio or having projects and code that you can talk to gives you the advantage of being able to prepare for your own interview, right? Because, and me as an interviewer personally, like I can put you through some programming riddle on a whiteboard, but I hate doing it, because I already know the answer and I've already heard it 4 other times just that day interviewing other folks, right? And so I've had to listen to 4 other people totally flop on solving these problems that they weren't expecting to have to solve right away, right? Not only that, it's just a terrible metric for figuring out whether or not like you would fit in. And that's really what I feel like most interviews should be about is like, are you a Rick or are you not? Right. It's kind of the takeaway. So having some example code when you come in is like really important because then, you can say like, look at this garbage, right? This is totally, I would not do it this way anymore. And this is why, right? And I've actually gotten jobs for doing that because I've, walked through some project I had and said like, yeah, I totally wouldn't do this, but I got this out really quickly. And like later I know I can go back and refactor this, right? Also just being able to contribute on like GitHub and things like that. If you've got pull requests being accepted by open source projects out there, it doesn't matter how big or small they are. Like I can't say I've ever been to a party where I've been like, yeah, I got commits in Bootstrap.
I'm putting a shameless plug in. If you're not part of Operation Code and you haven't joined us, we do have an open source software program that you can practice and build your GitHub portfolio, and you can contribute. If you're a designer or more on the product side, you can do that as well. I put the link in the chat, operationcode.org/join. And when you join, you'll be greeted by somebody on the outreach team, or you'll find a bunch of us friendly people that'll just greet you and point you in the direction of where you'd like to go. Thank you, Todd, for joining us tonight. As always, it's a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for your questions. See you soon.
All right. Thank you, guys.